Good afternoon, blog viewers. Today we're going to talk about self-knowledge and self-deception, and we'll finally put this in probably the love series because it's very, very closely related to self-love, these concepts. Now, self-knowledge and self-deception are sort of like are in a sort of inverse relationship. Very much like heart rate and blood pressure. If your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure drops. If your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes down. And similarly, as self-knowledge grows, self-deception tends to drop. And as self-deception grows, self-knowledge drops. So they're very, very closely related. We'll start out making some general remarks on self-knowledge. Then focus on self-deception as sort of an impediment or a blockage point to reaching self-knowledge, and then talk about how self-knowledge can actually grow, and why we would want it to grow, and in what ways it's beneficial, and in what ways is it better than self-deception. Because you can form, I think one comment or one thread that you'll see throughout this post is you can form your sense of self, self-esteem, self-identity, whatever term you want to use, but conception of self and valuing of the self. I think you have the choice either to base that or ground that in self-knowledge or self-deception, sort of similar to the ideas we were talking about in the other earlier posts about choosing fantasy or reality. And I think in this post, we'll see why self-deception is commonly resorted to in coming up with a self-esteem and self-identity, and why it may not be such a good idea to do that. Now, self-knowledge, it's strange to start off. It's even strange to believe. It's strange to think that self-knowledge would be such a difficult thing to achieve for a human being, and it surely is a very difficult thing to achieve. It's very strange, isn't it, not to know yourself? This thing that you're with all the time, that you've been with for decades, this thing that you've been sort of in an opportunity to observe for so long. You've had the best opportunity of anyone to observe. This thing that you know the actions of better than anyone else. Now, it's totally understandable, for example, that you wouldn't have a frickin' clue about the atmosphere of Jupiter or Pluto or whatever, because these things are several million miles away, many, many million miles away, and you've never seen them. But how can you not know yourself, even after 30 to 40 years of life, even after 70, 80 years of life? How can you still not know yourself? How is this even possible? What are the mechanisms that allow this kind of thing to happen to you? Framed in this way, we can obviously almost immediately see self-deception as being one way that you don't gain self-knowledge. And self-deception that we're going to talk about here is, I'm going to define it very simply, as you're lying to yourself about yourself. Simple as that. Self-deception is you're lying to yourself about yourself. Now, lying, as we know in everyday life, can take many, many different forms. And it's engaged in for many different reasons. But it's common. That's the point. Lying is common in terms of external relations between people. And so we might think, why would it be any less common in terms of people's relationship with their self? Now, lying can take many, many different forms, including lies of exaggeration, lies of sort of selective disclosure, and lies of willful ignorance. These are all forms of lying. In our legal system, these are all forms of fraud. You can have a fraud claim where there's an outright lie. You can have a fraud claim where there's an exaggeration. You can have a fraud claim where there's a failure to disclose, or there's been selective disclosure. So all these things are forms of lying. Now, why do people lie in everyday life? I think that answer is basically they believe people believe, rightly or wrongly, that lying will further their interests in some form or another. It's going to get them where they want to go painlessly. Or if not painlessly, at least easier than telling the truth. Lying appears often more advantageous or just easier than telling the truth on a certain point. And the situation is no different with self-deception, which is, again, simply the lies you're telling yourself about yourself rather than the lies you tell other people about whatever. Now, self-deception can take many different forms, and it usually does not take very obvious ones. Don't think you can figure out how you are self-deceiving yourself very easily. It's not easy to figure out how or why or in what manner you're engaging in self-deception. You don't engage in self-deception in very obvious ways. People don't self-deceive themselves by thinking, for example, that they're the president of America when they're not. It's much more subtle than that. Self-deception usually occurs much more indirectly. And so what are the common ways this happens? I'd say three of them are, again, similar to the lying example, is exaggeration, selective attention to facts about the self, and willful ignorance. Exaggeration is obviously, in terms of self-deception, is when we either exaggerate some positive attribute of the self or some negative attribute of the external world, whether another person or some other thing. Now, we do this exaggeration repetitively for years and decades and build up sort of one huge self-deception within. So that would be the exaggeration pathway. Another way we can do this is to selectively attend to facts about the self. Again, here we focus on the positive facts largely, and we almost totally exclude the negative facts. Willful ignorance. We don't even seek out information relating to the self for fear this information may be damaging. So we don't even get to that point to exaggerate or ignore it because we don't even get the information. Now I want to focus on number 2, selective attention to facts about the self, because I think that's a very, very common one. It's a very easy way to engage in self-deception, but it's no less damaging. Now what we do here is we focus on many, many true but trivial facts about the self and ignore some huge fact that would almost totally obliterate the significance of all the trivial facts. Look at the case of these cyclists that were doping all these years. They could compile for themselves all these true facts about their achievements in cycling, all of which would be true. They did, in fact, go this many miles at this many miles per hour, which was faster than anyone had ever had. Same with the baseball players that were hitting all the home runs when they were on steroids. They did actually hit those home runs. Their bats did hit the balls, and they did go out of the ballpark. But the key fact is that they were doping to achieve this. This last fact just totally obliterates the meaning of all those other several thousand facts. It just totally makes those facts so paltry compared to the one huge fact that's not being considered. Now, what do people gain from self-deception? Obviously, again, with lying, we start out with the assumption that people lie for some reason. It's not totally senseless in most cases, in almost all cases. So what do people gain from self-deception? There has to be some gain. Flattering image of the self is what people gain. And this flattering image allows for self-love, self-esteem, self-identity, whatever it is. Now, self-love, self-esteem, all those things are very good things, but the foundation of these things should also be similarly good, stable, and true. In this way, I would argue self-deception is a very short-term measure. And it can still be a short-term measure, even if you engage in it for several years, maybe 3, 5 years, something like that. It can still be a relatively short-term measure to build self-love and self-esteem. But like all short-term measures, it's a band-aid. It's not a total solution. In almost any form of love, including self-love, a love built on sort of shaky foundations is inferior to one built on sort of more enduring foundations. It sounds like a cliche, and it is one, but it's true. The trouble is, for this cliche to have any sort of value for you, is you have to get good at distinguishing what is a shaky foundation and what is more enduring. That's the challenge. It's not to repeat the formula that anyone can repeat the formula that loving things or basing things based on solid foundations is better than shaky, but you have to get really good in reality at distinguishing situations that are one or the other. And if you're serious about pursuing the good, I don't think you'll ever stop at Band-Aid measures, and you won't stop at self-deception in your quest for self-esteem and self-love. So how do you gain the self-knowledge that would allow you to stop engaging in self-deception and allow for self-love on a very good basis? First of all, you have to look for the huge facts about yourself that are unflattering and that you refuse to give credence to over and over again. You keep ignoring. If you have certain vices of character, then you ask yourself what that says about you that you engage in those vices so frequently. Let these facts become part of your assessment of yourself, of what you're doing with your life, of what you're achieving in your life, of what your conception of how you should act in reality toward other people and other things is. So definitely look for those huge facts. Second, stop exaggerating your positive points and blowing up other people's negative or other thing or external people and things negative attributes. The truth is likely to be that you're neither as good as you believe you are, and the external people and things that you criticize and denigrate or belittle are not as bad as you make them out to be. Third, make an emotional commitment to be absolutely nauseated, disgusted, angry, whatever term you want to use, by the fact that you know so little about yourself when you've had so many opportunities to grow that knowledge base over the course of life. You should be disgusted by the fact that you know more about, for example, the solar system or U.S. presidents or the stock market performance or celebrity marriages or sports team stats or whatever than you know about yourself. That should fill you with a sense of nausea, that how could this happen? How is this possible that I know more about those things than I know about myself? Fourth, let information of all sorts flow into your mind about who you are. Don't be so quick to judge certain facts as trivial and others as significant until you've gained a much better self-knowledge concept than you have right now. If you don't really know yourself, you aren't in a position to judge certain facts or behaviors of yours as trivial and others as significant, because that very assessment of trivial or significant requires that you have a fairly well worked out conception of what your core identity is, such that you could say that is significant to my identity and that is trivial. But if you don't have that, don't keep trivializing certain things as minor or whatever, and other things as more core to you, because you still haven't reached that point. And I think over time, in employing these self-knowledge attributes or methods and avoiding the self-deceptive pathways over time, you should gain a much better self-knowledge base, and that will create the foundation for the sorts of self-esteem and self-love that we've been talking about. So we'll come back shortly, and that's it for today.